Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is the Dell XPS 13, which is a thin and light little laptop that Dell's been offering for a number of years, but this is the 2020 version, the Dell XPS 13 9300, which has a couple of changes, including a faster processor, a redesigned display, and a couple of other changes that make it in some ways smaller, but also more powerful than previous generations. So I'm going to show you around this laptop. First, I wanted to point out that it's got only a couple of ports. It's got Thunderbolt 3, 3.5 millimeter headphone and microphone jack, another Thunderbolt 3, micro SD card slot, and that's it. So if you wanted to use this with, for instance, a full-size USB port, then you might want to use this included adapter that comes with it. If you wanted to plug in multiple accessories or HDMI or anything else, you're going to need some sort of dongle to do that, because it just does not have a lot of ports. It does have an interesting hinge here that allows you to open the laptop with a single finger, and you can get about that far before it starts to tip back, really. So that's a nice feature. It's got Face ID, a Windows Hello compatible IR camera, as well as a fingerprint sensor built into the power button right up here. So you have multiple ways to log in, and if you don't want to use biometrics, you don't want to use a finger or look at it, then you can just log in using a password or PIN or anything else. The version that Dell loaned me for the purposes of this review is one of the more expensive options. This version sells for about $1,750. There are cheaper versions that start as low as $1,000 for a model with a Core i3 processor, or $1,200 for a version with a Core i5 processor. This version has a Core i7 Ice Lake processor with Intel Iris Plus graphics, 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gigs of storage, and you also have to pay $50 extra to get it in white as opposed to black. Now, the white version has this glass fiber palm rest area, which is really quite attractive and comfortable to put your hand on. It's got a little textured feel here. It looks really nice. But the thing I don't love about the white, and this is the same as the experience I had when I was reviewing the Dell XPS 2-in-1, the Dell XPS 13 2-in-1, is that with the white backlit keyboard and white keys, it can actually be kind of difficult to see the keyboard when the illumination is on. So white keys with a black background or a black lettering looks great. White keys with white lettering or white illumination makes it kind of difficult to see. So depending on how you're using this, where you're using this, what the lighting conditions are, it can actually be a little bit difficult to see the keys. But overall, I mean, I do like the look of the white version. I'm not sure if it's something I would spend an extra $50 on. We've got a aluminum back here, aluminum along the sides as well, and then that little sort of thin strip of white along the screen. And one of the biggest differences between this year's version and previous generations is that screen. It's a 13.4-inch 16 by 10 aspect ratio display. This version a 1920 by 1200 pixel display. You can also get it with a 4K screen, which is 3840 by 2400. I don't know that I would necessarily spend extra on that because it's going to reduce your battery life, and this screen looks pretty sharp as it is, but it is an option that you have as well. Now, as I mentioned, there's only those two ports on the side, so in order to charge this laptop, you have this power adapter, which is relatively small by laptop power adapter standards, and it plugs right into one of the Thunderbolt 3 ports. And when you do that, let me just plug this in for a second here. I'll show you the light glows on the adapter and the light glows on the laptop itself to let you know it's charging. So you can see we've got illumination right here. Actually, can you see that? There you go. And illumination right here along the front as well. So you unplug that light goes off. You plug it in, the light goes on. And you can see that it's charging even when the laptop is sleeping. Again, open it with one hand or one finger and logs in almost instantly as soon as it sees my face. I find the Face ID is actually quicker and more responsive than the fingerprint. Overall, in terms of performance, I've been pretty happy with this little laptop. It does really nicely in terms of benchmarks, and it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of battery life. So it has a 52 watt-hour battery that is I'd say it provides around 7 hours of battery life when I'm using it. And I use it primarily for blogging. That's what I do for a living. I write littleputing.com. I do a lot of research and a lot of work, and I can sit down for, 5-6 hours and get down to 20 or 30% battery. And after around 7 hours, it's just going to poop out entirely. Now, if you were using it with, say the brightness set to about 50% and just streaming video and nothing else, it actually lasts much, much, much longer. I ran a video test where I just set it up and I had it play a 10-hour video and it was still going. And then I played another 3-hour video and it was still going. I'd say that you might be able to get as long as 15 hours of battery life when all you're doing is using it to stream video from YouTube. So just give you a quick look at a YouTube video here. If I can get it to connect. Another thing that I wanted to point out is this display. Not only does it have slim bezels on the top and the sides, but it has a slim bezel on the bottom. Dell says that they shrunk that bottom bezel from around 19 millimeters to about 4.7, I want to say. Definitely less than 5. So you overall get much more of a almost borderless display look. There's borders, but they're not huge borders. So this is a video that I just uploaded a little while ago. Let me turn some audio on so you can hear it. Battery. Power button up here, select Xbox and start buttons. Let's see if we can power it up. And just for comparison here, again, I'm going to bring up that. Now I'm going to point out here that when you're watching video on this, because it's got a 1200 pixel, 1920 by 1200 pixel display, you actually do get slight black bars on the top and the bottom because there's not a lot of content that's filmed with a 16 by 10 aspect ratio. You get a lot more content that's filmed with 16 by 9 or 21 by 9. So, you do get more screen space, but it's not necessarily going to be great for multimedia. I mean, it's not bad for multimedia, but what I think it comes in handy more for is when you are, say, going to a website, or reading a document, or editing documents, or anything like that, you basically get a few more pixels down here on the bottom than you would otherwise have. So on a 1920 by 1080 screen, you'd probably lose about this much of the bottom of the screen. So you might not be able to read that bottom line there. When you're reading longer articles, let's say a review, I think it's going to be even more noticeable that the page would probably top out around here, so you get an extra paragraph or so. So I think that's why a lot of people like these 16 by 10 aspect ratio displays, is because you can fit so much more on the screen when you're using it in full screen. I think it's a different story if you go to half screen, which is something I do pretty regularly. Right now, I've actually got the screen set to 125% scaling, because I find that pretty comfortable in my eyes. At 100% scaling, everything gets a little bit sharper. Yes, you can fit more content, but it gets a little harder to read. You notice the buttons look a little bit smaller, the text is a little bit smaller. So, it's great that you get more fits on the screen at a time. And if your eyesight is maybe better than mine, this isn't a problem for you at all. But I tend to do a lot of work in split screen mode here with content on the left and content on the right. And when I do that at 125% scaling, I get less horizontal space. So some websites might cut off, document editing applications, I might not be able to see all of the menus and everything that I want. So I find it to be a little bit of a mixed bag. Sure, it's still 1920 pixels, but it's a little bit, because it's taller, because the aspect ratio is 13.4, stretched differently. I think that a typical 13.3 inch laptop with a 16 by 9 fits my workflow better, because it would come out a little bit further and maybe be a little bit less tall. Now that's me. I know that there are other people who really prefer this, and I see the advantage, and I definitely see the advantage on things like the Dell XPS 13 2-in-1, because then you can flip the screen all the way around 360 degrees and use it as a tablet. And at a 16 by 10 aspect ratio in portrait mode, you really sort of get a little bit more benefit from it that way, I think, as well. But for my personal preference, I think I would actually prefer 16 by 9. Despite the fact that we've got very slim bezels, we do have a webcam. It's one of Dell's little 2.25 millimeter webcams that they managed to stick in the top there. You already saw the IR cam that allowed me to log in quickly. There's also an ambient light sensor. It's just a 720 pixel camera. It's not particularly high resolution. I think it looks a little pixelated, but you know, in this day and age when a lot of people are making Zoom calls and doing a lot of video conferencing, it's nice that there is a camera. Earlier versions of the Dell XPS 13, they did away with this a year or two ago, but earlier versions, in order to keep that top bezel slim, they put the camera in the bottom, and I think that was not necessarily the best place for it, because what would happen is as you were typing or doing other things, your fingers would get in the way. Now I'd have to put my hand all the way up here for it to get in the way. So I think that's a design choice that was the right one. It was to figure out how to shrink that camera, and I think they did a pretty good job with that. The keyboard, other than the fact that the illumination is kind of weird, I think is pretty decent. It's got about 1 millimeter key travel. Some of the keys are a little bit larger than they were on previous versions, so that the keyboard can stretch from edge to edge. So you've got nice big Enter and Caps Lock. I don't know why your Caps Lock needs to be so big, but whatever, it's big. Shift on both sides, Alt on both sides, Control on both sides. One thing that's a little bit, well, two things that are a little bit strange is the arrow keys. We've got like large, full-size left and right and smaller up and down arrow keys, and the home and end buttons are all the way up here. These are not really intuitive to me. I think with any laptop, you can get used to it over time, and the more you get used to it, the more you're like, okay, I need to hit home, I'll go up here. But I'm used to having them closer to where the page up, page down keys are, so as I'm typing, if I actually do need to move the cursor to the beginning or the end of a document or a line, it takes me a while to think that I need to move up there, particularly if I'm switching back and forth between this laptop and another one. As I mentioned, in terms of performance, it does pretty well. The Ice Lake graphics, the Iris Plus graphics that come with this are good enough for basic gaming. It's not really a high-end gaming machine, but it can get the job done for some games that you might want to play. You know, of course, your battery life is probably going to go down a little bit if you really push it there. But let me see, are you loading? Yes, you are loading. But I'll just throw in a little bit of a demo here, one of 3D Mark's benchmark utilities before I close out this video so you can see it. For more details, you can go to liliputing.com, where I'm going to have a written version of this review, which has far more photographs, extra details, lots of other information. Let's do a little night raid. So overall, though, I mean, I think it's a nice value. It's thin, it's light, it's weighs about 2.6 pounds, measures about 0.6 inches thick. It's a laptop that you can really take with you just about anywhere you go. It's got that 16:10 aspect ratio display, which is pretty sharp and looks great from all sorts of different angles. It opens about yay far, if that's something that matters to you. It is a glossy screen. It's this version has a touch screen. Touch is optional. Lower end models don't necessarily have it. Has a good fingerprint sensor. Well, it has a fingerprint sensor. It has a good IR camera that I think is pretty reliable. Fingerprint is a little bit less so for me. Biggest issues that I have with it are the backlit keyboard on the white model. The backlight can be useless under certain conditions, as I mentioned, and the layout of the home and end and some of these other keys. But overall, typing experience is pretty good. I actually prefer this to the Dell XPS 13 2-in-1, which has a maglev keyboard with less travel. I find this more comfortable and I make less typos when I'm using it. And I wouldn't mind a full-size USB port or an HDMI port or even a micro HDMI port. Having just the two ports means that unless you have a lot of wireless accessories, you're probably going to need some sort of adapters or dongles if you want to use this with an external display or wired accessories like a, I don't know, mouse, gamepad, or something along those lines. But as you can see here, you know, it gets pretty good frame rates when you're playing game demos, and you can find the actual results of benchmarks for various games at liliputing.com. Just want to show you the speakers work. And it does have stereo speakers, which are reasonably loud. So again, you can find more details at liliputing.com. You can find the link in the description of this video, as well as the link to Dell's website where you can purchase this. Again, this configuration is about $1,750, but there are lower price configurations if you don't need the touchscreen display, you are cool with the carbon fiber black version instead of the glass fiber white version, less memory, less storage, different processor options, and so on. This is Brad Linder with Liliputing and the Dell XPS 13 9300, the 2020 version of Dell's thin and light laptop.